Bonjour tout le monde. How's everyone doing? I hope you guys are having a great day or had a great day, and you can still continue to have a great day. I'm coming to you with another video in the category of the infamous emancipation. Let's talk a little bit more about it. We have been, well, since I was in school, this country just, tooted their horn on one of their presidents releasing people from bondage. That should have been a crime in itself, crime against humanity. But anyhow, that's just like someone breaking into your house, and then just because they develop a conscience 400 years later, come back and say, hey, you know what? Let me give you your things back. Well, some of them back. And then they go on the news and public publicity campaign talking about how they suddenly grew a conscience and gave things back to the person they stole from. So this is how I feel about the emancipation. I was never the type of person that was excited about it. I don't know anybody. Maybe, yeah, of course, if I was back in those days, I would be excited about it. But this is how I feel about the whole emancipation thing. I don't think too many people thought it through before it was executed. Or if they did think it through, they knew it wouldn't really be upheld on a local level or a state level. I feel like it should have been against the law or unethical at best to release millions of people without some form of plan. Like establishing financial resources specifically for those that were just released from slavery, giving them some land to build their own communities and homes. It was a travesty how the government just released these people who were not accustomed to caring for themselves, unmolested by hateful people with no form of finances or anything to establish themselves. Truth be told, it seemed like it could have been a big old setup. Listen to me before you jump to conclusions. The reason why I call it a setup, or it appears to be a setup, listen to this. Millions of people, like I said, that were accustomed to taking care of everyone but themselves. They really didn't even have the opportunity to, how everybody's talking about self-love and self-care. Hey, why don't you take a little time out of the day and think about yourself? That didn't apply to slaves. So you released them out into the wild around hard-pressed men and women who were bent on keeping things as they were. You released them without any form of self-protection, aka money and land, and you watched them slowly perish. It seemed like that was a plan. Our people weren't expected to go on, to still be here, as I've said multiple times. Black Americans, I'm speaking directly to you. If you can't see how peculiar you really are, how peculiar your ancestors were, touched by God, I don't know what to tell you. There are folks who can't handle small losses in their lives, small fortunes, big fortunes. They can't handle that. The smallest amount of pressure makes them crumble and fold like a house of cards. Look what our people been through, and look what we continue to go through today over 400 years. Or if you don't see how peculiar you are, I don't know. I don't know what else to tell you. Okay, let's move on. I want to discuss a little bit about Texas and slavery before the infamous emancipation. The enslavement of African Americans was the curse of early American life, and Texas was no exception. The Mexican government was opposed to slavery, but even so, there were 5,000 slaves in Texas by the time of the Texas Revolution in 1836. By the time of the annexation a decade later, there were 30,000. By 1860, the census found 182,566 slaves, over 30% of the population of the state. Most slaves came to Texas with their owners, and the vast majority lived on large cotton plantations in East Texas. The life of a Texas slave differed little from other places in the South. Most slaves had the basics: food, clothing, and a crude log cabin for shelter. But they were kept poor and worked hard. Most were field hands who worked from sunup to sundown, and while Texas law prohibited an owner from killing or maiming the slave, whippings were considered acceptable and were a common form of punishment. Historians estimate that at least 70% of the slaves received whippings at some point in their lives. Slaves were extremely valuable assets to their owners. During the late 1850s, a young male field hand cost about $800, while a skilled blacksmith would go for over $2,000, the equivalent today of $16,000 to $40,000. By contrast, prime cotton growing land sold for $6 an acre. The forced labor of slaves made plantation farming very profitable for the slaveholders. By the time of the Civil War, slaveholders controlled most of the wealth in Texas and dominated politics at all levels. They were pushing slavery westward into central Texas at the time that the war halted the growth of the slave system. The slave system in Texas, as elsewhere, was held in place by brute force. Some slaves managed to run away to Mexico, but most recognized that an unsuccessful escape would mean a severe beating or being sold away from their families. For most slaves, no matter what they did or how hard they worked, there was simply no way out of slavery for themselves or for their children. In many important areas of life, they were robbed of their basic human rights. They could not plan for the future or even decide for themselves what to do in the course of a day. That's what I said in my other video, the last video I just published called Tragic, and talking about the emancipation. I said, it was like it was almost like they just woke up out of bed and was like, hey, let's release these millions and something black folks that never took care, were allowed to take care of themselves, never allowed to build a home for themselves. They never learned the European business while they were in chains. Hell, they couldn't even learn how to read or write. So you just let these people go loose without a plan. Come on, man. As much as this country prides itself on being so civilized and they write damn near everything and store it, why didn't you have a better plan when you decided to emancipate these people around a group of people that was hell-bent on keeping slavery as it were? That didn't make sense. In spite of their oppression, the slaves did not behave like a defeated people. Instead, they tried to make the best of their lives and to carve out what independence they could. Most slaves were allowed to be on their own in the evenings and during time off on Saturday afternoons and Sundays. They took full advantage of their time to enjoy their families and try to keep them together, to build a remarkable religious community, and to create a rich and influential cultural heritage, especially in the era of music. When the Civil War came, Texas was not invaded, and the slaves continued to live and work as they had before. They realized that a Union victory would mean their liberation, and they listened for news as best they could and passed the word of any developments. It was not until June 19, 1865, that Union forces occupied Texas and officially freed slaves. The day will be celebrated in the years to come as Juneteenth. I wouldn't even say I'm torn about Juneteenth. I don't think too much of Juneteenth. I just don't, because I look at how our people were treated before the emancipation, and I look how they were treated after, and I look how they're treated today. So I'm thinking, like, what is there to celebrate? What are you celebrating? That's just like somebody in prison for life and because they got a day off work with pay, they have a party. You're still in prison. So what are you celebrating? You're not getting out of prison anytime soon, or you have life. So what are you celebrating? Because you got a day off? I know that that's not too good of an analogy, but that's the only thing I can think of right now as I'm recording this. But yeah, I don't see what the celebration is all about. You still have a corrupt, racist legal system. You still have redlining going on. You still have banking institutions discriminating. You still have just what has been done to black Americans is after slavery, after the emancipation, is still, in a sense, going on today. Okay, let's get it. In the last vid I published, titled Tragic Emancipation Helped Lead Ex-Slaves to Their Death, I said when the wicked institution so-called ended, you don't know what people did to ex-slaves after the emancipation. The ones who were comfortably accustomed to having people in chains. Well, I'm about to tell you, buckle up. The ride will be bumpy as hell while we take this journey to uncover this country's hell-based past. A Union officer said, given a choice between hell and Texas, I would live in hell and rent out Texas. It was just that bad in Texas. That's what a Union officer said. In 1903, a black man walked into an office in a small town in Texas seeking any news about whether slavery had ended. The earnest inquiry from the man who had been forced to labor without pay came more than 38 years after Major Gordon Granger landed on Galveston Island, Texas, with more than 2,000 federal soldiers to deliver the belated news of freedom to enslaved people in Texas. Word of the end of the bondage for more than 250,000 enslaved black people in the state arrived on June 19, 1865, 2 years after President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. Despite the clear instructions in General Order Number 3 and the announcement that day by Granger's men that the people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the executive of the United States, all slaves are free. Not every enslaved black person in Texas was free with that proclamation. Enslavers across the state resisted the general's order, hiding the news from enslaved black people. Many black people were forced to continue to labor until the oppression of ruthless enslavers. There was almost universal agreement from statements of enslaved people that many Texas slave owners held off making the announcement, said historian C.R. Gibbs. They wanted another crop. Many black Texans didn't receive the news until 1866. Slave owners resorted to tricks. They delayed, they postponed. This was money, said Gibbs, author of the Black, Copper, and Bright, the District of Columbia's Black Silver War Regiment. They wanted to continue to get every last drop of sweat from slavery. Even after Granger's order, black people remain in such a delicate situation in Texas, Gibbs said. You have the collapse of the Confederate government and roving bands of men who wanted to turn the clock back, a Union officer once said. During the Civil War, Texas was a refuge for enslavers evading emancipation. Slave owners in Arkansas, Tennessee, and Louisiana ran their Negroes from Arkansas, Louisiana, and other parts of the states into Texas because the U.S. Army had not reached Texas, said W. Marvin Delaney, a retired University of Texas Arlington historian and president of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. After Granger's order, the Union Army literally had to march across Texas to enforce the order. and free enslaved black people. In some cases, enslavers killed enslaved black people rather than allow their freedom. You see how sick? Okay. Just because you couldn't continue to own these people that you treated like animals or worse than animals, you chose to kill them. You had to have some kind of hatred in your heart that I can't even describe, and I don't even have the mentality to process it because I don't have hatred in my heart like that. Regardless of all the things that have been done to my people, I can sincerely say today that I have no hatred in my heart towards those that put our people, or the ancestors of those who put our people in chains, the perpetuation of the descendants of the ancestors. I don't have hatred, but I'm not going to sit here and let things continue to be covered up and lied about. What you hear, and the purpose of me doing these videos, is the passion I have for my people and the passion of revealing the truth. So a lot of people want to build their platforms on lies or whitewashing and diluting. I'm building my platform on the opposite. It's not going to be no whitewashing or diluting. Let's continue. Slaves were treated very harshly. Bodies could be found hanging on trees or floating in rivers. Texans were so resentful that African Americans would become free, they literally carried out a pogrom. Delaney said they killed as many as 2,500. They were just murdered outright across the state. Violence increased against African Americans between 1865 and 1868. Of course, you know it wasn't a fair fight. When has this country ever heard of fighting fair when it came to black folks? Black folks freely released from slavery. Do you think they had guns? Like the slave owners and the overseers? So how would it have been a fair fight? So you remember what I said in the last video about bullying? That's all they've done to black folks is bully them. It's like they get off bullying black folks. In some cases, enslaved black people in Texas were run down by bloodhounds or shot rather than to be released from bondage. It takes almost over a year for the Union Army to literally go across the state and free African Americans from slavery. Slavery formally ended in the United States on December 6, 1865, with the ratification of the 13th Amendment, which stated neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment of crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States. You see how they had to put that in there? In other words, it was like a secret message. Hey, we gonna put this down on paper and we're gonna release these folks. But I just want you to know that if they commit any form of a crime, or even if you suspect that they committed a crime, lock them up. And you can lock them up as your choice the way you lock them up. You can lock them up on your plantation and make them do free labor, or you can lock them up and lease them out. Got it? That exception clause created a loophole permitting slavery to continue in another form and allowing officials in the South to perpetuate slavery conditions, including forced prison labor and convict leasing. That was an intentional loophole. Are there people that really believe that this government isn't as wicked and evil as it is? God, if they still believe that, they can bottle that mentality and sell it. Let's continue. Listen to this. Granger's Juneteenth order contained a similar caveat. It declared that all slaves are free, but that the relationship between former masters and slaves should become that between employer and hired labor. You think when black folks, or when people say, primarily I'm speaking about black folks, when they say, man, that a job is like slave, you just a paid slave. Didn't I tell you in another video that a lot of things that were instituted had to do with black folks? The man put in his order that the relationship between the former master and slaves should become that between employers and hired laborers. You think they didn't continue on with that? Don't you feel like a damn slave when you go to these jobs? The only difference is you get time off to go home to do whatever you want to do, and you get a check at the end of the week or every other week or once a month. That's the only difference. These people could care less about you or your personal life. That's why you can go to work or call in and really have something seriously going on, not just making up an excuse. And they'll just, all right, Roger, you got one more. Didn't you just call in last month? And you still got to say, what? You got to take your what? Didn't you just have to take your daughter to the hospital last month? Like people don't, like things just don't happen. It's like you took your daughter to the hospital last month. Damn. Can she hold off another week? Because we need you in this office. All you are is just a person. You are still a slave. And this applies to white, Asians, Hispanics, what have you. I'm not just talking about black folks being treated as slaves on the job. I'm talking when it comes to money, it doesn't matter what your color is. They're going to treat you like a slave. Let's continue. Granger's orders continued on. The freedmen are advised to remain at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts, and they will not be supported in idleness either, there or elsewhere. You know what's so damn ridiculous to me? How they was just gonna force this down black people's throat that they're lazy. If they were so, I was about to slip. If they were so lazy, how the hell did they build you wealth for years? How can a lazy slave make you rich? It's not adding up. If they were lazy, nothing would have been done on your farms and your plantations. Nothing would have been done in your prisons. I was about to slip again. Lord, help me. The ludicrousness of it all just, takes you there. That last line, historians say, set the stage for the continuation of slavery through convict leasing and black code, laws that would restrict the freedom of black people. Granger was warning them against the idleness, Delaney said. That order would lead to creation of vagrancy laws and black codes that would be wielded against black people, forcing them into forced labor without pay.
You see why some people are really just putting on the pressure when it comes to reparations, and the first thing people think about money. They think about money. That's this country thrives off of money. Reparations, giving them money. It's like, boo. Reparations mean repair. So if our communities weren't destroyed, that would have been generational wealth. Our lands weren't stolen, generational wealth. Why do you think majority of the land is owned by white folks? Even the land they stole from black folks. Because they know there's money in owning land and property. If a lot of things weren't interfered with, we would have our own wealth. And when you do wrong to someone, you have to repay it. You have to. Even today, you do wrong to somebody and see if they don't take it to court. Or demand, if they don't take it to court, they're going to demand that you repay or compensate them. So that's logical when it's dealing with everyone else, but when it's dealing with those called black folks, they lose their mind. Money. Your mind can't conceive how much this country owes those called black Americans. And some of them probably like don't even know how to process it because so much is old. I say old, in place of saying demand, but it's past owing. Mark my word. Put this video in your favorites. It's gonna happen one way or the other. It's either, like I keep saying, you're gonna willingly give it, or it's just gonna be snatched from you. And there are so many ways it can be snatched. You can just lose. You just because you refuse to do right by those called Black Americans, you're gonna start losing everything you have because you refuse to do right. So it's gonna happen, and and I believe it's happening today. I really do. I really do think that a lot of corporations and people who gain wealth from doing wrong to God's people, aka those called Black Americans, a lot of their wealth is depleting, and they don't even know how to stop it. It's like hemorrhaging, and pretty soon they're not going to be able to keep covering it up. Mark my word.
Let's continue. The sharecropping system and laws prohibiting Black people from hunting, fishing, also prevented Black people from feeding themselves and required them to work for white people. You hear that?
How the hell you gonna come up with a law preventing somebody from feeding themselves? They didn't think, was there a such thing as crime against humanity back then? I mean, who sat there and agreed? Yeah, Thomas, go ahead. I will be there, and I will second that law. If you come up with that law, I'll vote with you for it. Let's inhibit Black folks from feeding themselves so they can come over here and work for Chester. Who greenlit that law? Try to stop a person from feeding themselves and see what happens. Try to stop a person today from being able to feed themselves and their family and see what happens.
Let's continue. You had to sign a work contract at the beginning of each year, or you could be rented out to a plantation, Delaney said. In many cases, it was like being sold. The owners would have control over you. It was like being a slave.
And I told you, the more things changed, the more things stayed the same.
Some enslavers resisted the Emancipation Order by fleeing, taking their enslaved people south into Cuba and Brazil, where slavery had not been outlawed. The kidnapping of Black people out of the country struck fear in those who were still in precarious situations in the control of their former enslavers without protection from the Union troops.
Nobody ever really protects Black folks. And then you got the nerves to talk about gun restrictions. Black folks, I implore you, go out there and buy you at least one firearm, a good one. And even those who just, oh my God, I just cannot stand guns. You better go out there and buy you a gun with some ammo. If you don't want to buy a gun, you better buy some weapon that, in case of emergency, is not going to let you down. I was on this social media platform, and the discussion of gun ownership came up, and there was a lot of people that was anti-gun on the post where we were having a discussion about guns, and this man came in and said, he's not big on guns, but he's not against them either. He said, I'd rather have one and not need it than to not have one and need it. And then, don't you know, during 2020, when all the craziness started really coming out, the ones that were so-called anti-gun were the main ones going to go buy guns. And then you have these politicians who are so anti-gun, but ask them if the security guard that escorts them to and fro have guns, or do they have slingshots. I'm not just speaking directly to Black people. You got to wonder why this country is so bent on trying to take guns out of the hands of law-abiding citizens. There are people who have been owning guns for 20, 30, 40, 50 years and never shot it at anyone. Never used it, never harmed anybody, never harmed themselves, never harmed their family members by accident. So why are this country so bent on taking the guns out of the hands of people who obey the law? You gotta ask yourself these questions and stop sounding like a parrot. Oh my God, anti-guns, no guns kill. Okay, don't find yourself in a situation where you gonna wish you had at least a BB gun and you ain't even got that. I was never big on guns. I wasn't raised in a family that was just like gun addicts, and I wasn't raised in a family that was anti-gun. As a matter of fact, my grandfather had a shotgun. I think it was a rifle, and my grandmother had like maybe a .38. But they didn't talk about guns. I just happened to see them one day. Something went down. I don't know if they was cleaning up or my grandfather had to pull out a gun on this. That's a whole different story. But anyway, like I wasn't raised to be against guns, and I wasn't raised to be for them. And I didn't consider becoming a gun owner until 2015. It was just a whole bunch of effery going on around the country, and I was like, "Woo, these people beside themselves." So I didn't really act on it until 5-6 years later. I tell anybody I know, especially the ones I care about, go get you a gun. It's just ludicrous. The way what's going on today is just really, and yes, I firmly believe in God. But even Jesus told his disciples that they could sell their robe or something and go get a sword. So come on now, get off it. Stop being scared. If you have respect and treat the gun the way you're supposed to treat it, like it's always loaded, and have common sense and store it away, lock it away, and lock your ammo away, you ain't gonna have no problems.
Let's continue. Frederick Douglass' brother, Perry Downs, who was enslaved in Texas, recounted hearing his enslavers say that he would run his property out of Texas. No one knows how many enslaved black people were driven further south by enslavers to avoid freeing them. There were unnamed numbers of black people taken out of the United States to places where there was still slavery. Slavery was not abolished in Cuba until 1866. Brazil became the last country in the Americas to abolish slavery in 1888. To this day, descendants of Confederates who drove enslaved black people into Brazil celebrate with festivals in the cities of Americana and Santa Barbara do Oeste, celebrating the Confederate States of America with Confederate flag displays and dances. The issue was that pro-slavery Texans did not agree with or feel inclined to enforce anti-slavery laws. So they simply ignored the end of slavery until the end of the Civil War, when an order from a Union general made it clear that Lincoln's 2-year-old Emancipation Proclamation would be upheld. But even that didn't make some Texans follow the law.
And they're the first one. Ooh. And they're the first ones to say, obey the law. See what I'm saying? How they pick and choose what laws. Okay, let me stop, Jenna.
Let's continue. Even after the first Juneteenth celebration on June 19, 1865, the people of Houston didn't quite get the message that blacks were free. Instead, they stopped free blacks in the street and demanded to know who their owners are.
Don't they still do that ish today? Stopping a black person from walking into the building they live or grocery store. Oh, God.
Listen to this. Let's continue. When those black Texans refused to answer or did not name their former owners, they will be accused of idleness and put to work for the city.
My God. And y'all got the nerves to sit up there and argue and seethe and get pissed off about reparations? when you literally had government officials behind the disenfranchisement of a whole group.
Let me continue. The Emancipation Proclamation was limited in many ways. It applied only to states that had seceded from the United States, leaving slavery untouched in the loyal border states. It also expressly exempted parts of the Confederacy, the southern secessionist states that had already come under Northern control. Most important, the freedom it promised depended upon United States military victory. In Texas, for many slave owners, however, the great majority of whom saw nothing to celebrate, the date was more important in any other way. Basically, they were saying that they had contracts with people. Prior to the Emancipation Proclamation, enslavers had contracts. They would, hire out slave hands and so forth, and people would pay these contracts and things, agreements. When the Emancipation Proclamation happened, a lot of those contracts were interrupted. Their monies was stopped. And then you had some people that demanded their money back, or some people declined to go through with the business deal because, hey, slavery is illegal. The contract we had prior to the Emancipation Proclamation has been voided out. So in other words, run me my money. So it was a lot of issues that erupted, and people had to go to court. So it's a big deal. Black people was celebrating being free. White people was pissed off because they lost their money. You want to see a white person get mad? Don't pay them that $5 you owe them and see what happens. I said that I was being funny, but I just said that to say a lot of people have an issue with not getting paid when someone owes them something. Some people fight 20, 30 years for something that they believe is owed to them or have proof is owed to them. But when it comes to people who look like me, and we talk about reparations, aka repairing the damages you caused or your ancestors caused and you perpetuated it, it's like everybody becomes dumb and mute. When you talk about reparations, you can't just talk about, because like I said, we were talking about any other group, it would be, people's eyes would be open, ears would be open, it would be no confusion. Go ahead and pay them. Go ahead, Bobby, just go ahead and agree. Go ahead and agree and let these people get their money or land or whatever. But when it comes to us, you're out of your cotton picking mind, pun intended. You're not going to get a dime of my hard-earned money, niggers. It just be a whole disposition change. They could be in church. Soon as you talk about reparations, they get to cussing and spitting and want to fire the pastor. But like I said, you got to add, when you talk about reparations in this country, you got to add not just what happened to those enslaved. You got to also remind them of what was perpetuated. Black codes, convict leasing, sharecropping. You just got to go down the line. Because like I said, some people just conveniently have amnesia when it comes to black folks. Why are you guys talking about reparations? I mean, aren't you guys better? No, Sally. It appears to be better, but it's not. Until we all come together, come up together as a group, like a lot of other groups, take their money that they earn off of black folks and go build beautiful communities or appear to be beautiful communities. Until we can do that, build our own communities, no. Black people aren't in a better space. We don't have our own communities. We have places that black people meet up, but something that we can call our own. Even where I live, it's a predominantly black community, which is rare. But, the past 5-something years, it's, So, like I said, we don't have our own. And until we can build our own and be independent, So that's the end, folks. Thank you. Thank you so much for taking time and listening to this message. And I hope it was interesting to you as it was to me. Whatever you do for the rest of the day or night, I hope you have peace. And I hope you're able to relax at some point in time in your life. And I will see you in the next video.